Today I want to share some of my top herbs for mold detoxification and even just detox in general, but I focus a lot of my practice on supporting moldy patients, and it's hard going a lot of the times. They are very unwell, they are very symptomatic, they are very reactive. There are a bunch of reasons why they're so symptomatic. The really big one there for me is mast cells. Like, I am convinced until proven otherwise, and I'm always shocked when this isn't the case, that mast cells are a major driver of mold affected patients. And so we got to stabilize them, and that'll improve their tolerance to treatments, and that will kind of facilitate the tolerance to the cure, the things that'll get them better. But initially they can be very reactive. So once they're through that, hyper-reactive phase where they're feeling better, that's where I like to get to work and recommend things that will improve the elimination of mycotoxins, which is what we're talking about today. If someone's mold exposed, and they are living in a moldy environment and then they leave, sometimes people get better, and maybe that's genetics, or maybe that's, some other thing, their ability to detoxify, maybe nutrients, maybe they've got something going for them. But a bunch of patients that I work with aren't better. They might be a little bit better, but they're definitely not thriving, even though they haven't been in that moldy environment for sometimes years. That's because mycotoxins can be very persistent, and they can actually just get recycled through the body without getting eliminated. So this is just part of the whole picture. It'll be too time consuming to go through the whole thing. But these are the herbs that I will turn to support that detoxification process. So I like to divide those herbs into three categories. The first herbs would be herbs that improve bowel movements, improve constipation, improve gut motility. That's one. Second big piece is herbs that improve or support or stimulate bile production and bile flow from the liver to the gallbladder to the small bowel. That triad needs to be synced up. And then the third really big piece is herbs that stimulate lymph flow. So all three of these categories kind of help push and move and detoxify and kind of shake things up a little bit, and that can make people feel worse. So this has to be a phased approach. It has to be as tolerated, and anytime we kind of push too hard and you don't feel good, we basically just pull it back, run the therapies that got you stable in the first place, and then try again, either gentler or from a different angle or in a different sequence of events. So first off, herbs that move the bowels. Now, you might be surprised, or maybe you're mold affected and this is something that you're living with. This might be your nightmare, but most mold affected patients have very slow motility, gut motility, and they are very constipated. Either they can't completely eliminate, they're skipping bowel movements, it's dry, it's hard. Sometimes it's more of that like toothpaste-like consistency where they just can't fully evacuate, and that is a huge treatment aim. You need to be eliminating through your bowel movements for the protocols to work. So sometimes people will kind of look up online, they'll say like, oh, I'm mold affected, I need a binder. They'll jump on the binder, they were already constipated, they become way more constipated, and they actually feel worse. And so they say, oh, that's not for me, and they never come back to it. That's the phased approach. To me, that was in the wrong approach for that patient. It's not for everyone. Sometimes people get on binders and their bowels start moving perfectly. Great. It's very holistic, and it's very specific to you as a person. How are you responding to, these treatment aims? And so if you are dealing with a sluggish gut and things aren't moving and things are stuck and things are stagnant and you're dealing with incomplete bowel movements, constipation, that would be a huge place to focus before you start moving into some of these more traditional mold detox protocols. And so let's move from the gentle to the more harsh kind of cathartic laxatives, but the gentle support here would be things like licorice. It's very soothing, it's very demoralizing. emulsant, it's very anti-inflammatory. Psyllium husk and flaxseed, they can be more of these like bulking, laxative pieces where it gives the stool bulk so that it can actually kind of get pushed out with that motility. Ginger, zhisha and chen pi, those are Chinese herbs, citrus peels. They might not be tolerated by all mold patients, but those three herbs and even globe artichoke can work almost as prokinetics, stimulating gut motility. And if we're moving on to some of the actual kind of like classic laxative herbs, starting gentle, yellow dock. I don't use a whole lot of yellow dock. I don't find it strong enough. Like when we want those laxative properties, yellow dock doesn't do a whole lot in my experience. And then moving up, something like Turkey rhubarb. It's kind of a moderate laxative and it's a decent prokinetic. It's one of my favorite herbs to bring on a bowel movement. It's very reliable. People don't tend to get hooked on it. Doesn't blow the doors off. You gotta kind of work that dose, and if you do get diarrhea, take less. And then if you really want the strong laxatives, if nothing else is working and we just have to move your bowels, then the two big hitters for me would be either and or cascara or aloe vera. And some people might be saying, look, aloe vera, I take that for leaky gut, it's very soothing, it's very demulcent, it's very, doesn't bring on bowel movements, doesn't cause diarrhea. It's because you're taking the inner leaf, the whole leaf, and it's got this little kind of yellow kind of outer portion of the herb, of the leaf, that has the anthraquinoglycosides that's going to stimulate your bowels like nothing else, way stronger than something like yellow dock or Turkey rhubarb. Some people might turn to senna. I don't love senna. I find it too strong. I don't use senna. I don't find I need to use senna, but if you do need to use senna, short and sharp, get the bowels moving. And then with all these stimulating laxatives, we want to be getting you off them as quick as possible. But sometimes we need them to break the seal, and I would prioritize a bowel movement over not using a stimulating laxative any day of the week as tolerated. You have to, be able to tolerate these therapies to use them. So those are the bowel movement herbs. That's in my dispensary. That's in my arsenal. I use them frequently. I have good results with them when we find the right one for you. And there's all these kind of bits of info that will help me gauge doses and where to pull back and where to lean forwards. There's this whole kind of decision-making tree that we go through together. And then if we're moving on to bile flow, we're talking a lot about bile production in the liver, and we're talking about bile flow to the gallbladder, to the small bowel, and we're remembering that mycotoxins are fat soluble, and so to detoxify them out of your body, they're going to be traveling through with bile, right? And so the more mold exposed someone is, and the more chronic this is, the slower that bile flow becomes until it can just grind to a halt. And sometimes patients wind up, and this is chronic long term, but they'll wind up with something like gallstones from that, right? And so we want to thin the bile, we want to move the bile. There's nutrients I use all the time, but if we're just focusing on herbs, choleretics can help stimulate bile flow in the liver. Cholagogues can help facilitate kind of bile flow from the gallbladder. And I'll kind of use them interchangeably. And this is maybe a bit controversial, but I actually don't think there's a huge difference between choleretics and cholagogues. I think a cholagogue tends to be a choleretic and a choleretic tends to be a cholagogue. And I can hear professional herbalists out there shaking their head already. But leave that comment in the description below. I want to hear from you. So top of the pile would be globe artichoke. It promotes bile, it's hepatoprotective, so it supports the liver, and it's a reasonable prokinetic. So it's a 2-for-1. It can stimulate your gut motility and it can stimulate your bile flow. Protect your liver at the same time. So the other big herbs here would be all of the berberine containing herbs, and berberine's a very bitter alkaloid. So a lot of that bitter taste on your tongue is going to be stimulating bile flow. And here, top of the pile for me would be barberry. I like barberry. It's gentle enough. People can tolerate it to an extent. It's very bitter. Also Oregon graperoot, which I really love. I am so upset, but we have a lot of trouble getting Oregon graperoot here in Australia. It comes in these big shipments and it's gone right away. You buy 10 kilos and you kind of stockpile it. I know it's not the same in America. It's widely available in America. And the other really big one there, the king kind of berberine containing antimicrobial, bitter, impossible to take. People just don't take it. It's called Coptis chinensis or gold thread huanlian. That's the Chinese herb. And so all those herbs are very yellow staining. Coptis is just top of the pile, and it is so bitter that it is very difficult to take at therapeutic doses. Along the same lines as globe artichoke, we've got dandelion root. That's a great cholagogue. It's pretty well tolerated, doesn't taste terrible. And the cool thing about dandelion root, if you're open to it, is to take it almost like as a tea, like a coffee substitute. So you can get these kind of roasted dandelion root and chicory root substitutes for coffee, and they're very cooling and they stimulate bile flow, and you can bring that medicine in without kind of taking it actually as medicine, more that self-care type of thing. Can be helpful. Yellow dock, there's a bit of a crossover there, so it can be really helpful for moving bile and a gentle kind of laxative. Again, I don't use a whole lot of it. Blue flag, it's too expensive here in Australia. I wish it wasn't, because it seems like an amazing herb. Don't have a whole lot of experience with it, but it can be a beautiful little cholagogue and a laxative. And then the last big one that is widely available everywhere that I will use as a cholagogue, hepatoprotective, so a little bit similar to globe artichoke, choleretic, is St. Mary's thistle. Top of the pile to protect your liver. But if you think about some of these actions of herbs and you think about the kind of material, if you're kind of making a St. Mary's thistle tincture and you're grinding it up, you can feel it's just so oily. That seed is incredibly oily, and that oil stimulates the gallbladder to contract, right? That's why the gallbladder contracts. You eat fat, the gallbladder contracts, spits out bile into the small bowel, emulsifies that fat, the bile does, and then you absorb it into the body proper. So those are my top herbs for bile flow and bile production. We're thinking the liver, gallbladder, small bowel triad, remembering that mycotoxins get reabsorbed. If they get spit out into the small bowel, they'll get reabsorbed with that bile back to the liver if you don't grab them and detoxify them. And we can think all the way back to the bulking laxatives, something like psyllium husk, psyllium seed, flax seed, chia seeds, hemp seeds. All those can help to bind and eliminate that bile with the mycotoxins as well. So you get a little bit of a 2-for-1 there as well, which is always helpful, because I would never recommend even a quarter of these herbs to one patient. We want to be choosy, and if you can use one herb to do 3 things, better bile flow, support the liver, and support elimination through the bowels, great. You've just accomplished 3 treatment aims with one herb. Awesome. So the last category of herbs would be the lymphagogues, and I don't feel like lymphagogues, herbs that stimulate lymphatics and lymph flow, get much press, and I'm trying to change that. I'm going to be talking a lot about that as we go on, so follow along. And the really big herbs that I'll turn to here would be cleavers. It's a pretty famous lymphagogue, pushes lymph. Second really big one would be echinacea. Most people think about echinacea more as like this immune stimulating herb. It kind of, brings the immune system up and online. I got a cold, take echinacea. But echinacea actually helps pump lymph and stimulates lymph flow. And then the third really big one would be calendula. And so you have a choice, we have a choice when we make calendula. We can make it high alcohol content, all the way up to 90%. That's a little bit more of this like antimicrobial, immune mediating kind of herbal medicine. And then if you do it with a low dose alcohol, low amount of alcohol in the tincture, which is what we use, it's more of a lymphagogue, and that's because those constituents come over more in water than in the alcohol. They're more soluble in water. So we use low dose calendula, which means that you could probably get away with drinking calendula tea and still get that kind of lymphagogue action. And then the last herb that we do use quite a bit of, and I don't feel like it's properly understood or utilized, I think herbalists get a little bit put off by it, is poke root. And that's because when you kind of look it up online, or you kind of look at the kind of global consensus on poke root, is that poke root is toxic. And that's if you take too much poke root. There's this low dose, potent lymphagogue. And the cool thing about poke root, you say, oh God, it's toxic, why are we taking it? You'll know, because the first symptom of you taking too much poke root, which is way before it becomes toxic, is you'll start to get nauseous. They call it an emetic. It'll make you vomit, basically. And so with low doses of this herb, it is the most potent lymphagogue that I know about. I love it. I'll use it. It's strong. But if you think about something like this, that's 500 mils. That's about a 5 or 6 week bottle. You might only have 10, 20, 30, 40 mil of poke root over that time. So a little bit goes a long way, which means that you're freeing up all that space for other actions and other kind of treatment aims. And the poke root is still going to do a really fantastic job moving lymph. So those are the herbs that I'll use for mold detox and detoxification in general. There's a whole bunch of other things you can do, but we're focusing on mobilizing and moving. And then the big piece that you can't forget is that you have to bind to eliminate, prevent that getting reabsorbed. So you can check that out in a different video here.